Well, I want to thank Congressman Levin, who I just confirmed got very little sleep last night. But we thank you for that sacrifice. An issue as important as the one we're gathered here to talk about. So it's been a proud partnership between Congressman Levin and myself in working on this tax reform measure. And I'm very proud of the support that we've been building with the help of some amazing leaders across the country to close this loophole. I want to particularly thank Patriotic Millionaires for their support and advocacy on closing the carried interest loophole. Today, we're joined by hedge fund and private equity managers who are calling for Congress to close a loophole that they themselves can take advantage of. And that's a pretty extraordinary thing. For 40 years, our country's economic policies have rewarded large corporations and the wealthiest with the promise that gains would trickle down. The trickle-down theory of economics has been around for that long. And it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. Instead, we've faced economic insecurity for more and more Americans. For far too long, our tax code has been rigged by the powerful interests to benefit millionaires and billionaires. And as a result, we have an economy that rewards only those at the top, while the incomes of ordinary Americans have truly flatlined. As middle-class families live paycheck to paycheck, hedge fund managers on Wall Street continue to get tax breaks, and that is not fair. The carried interest loophole allows Wall Street millionaires and hedge fund managers to pay a lower tax rate than many truck drivers, teachers, and nurses, and that needs to change. The fact is, the top 1% have used their influence to shape the rules of the economy to their advantage. And we need to reform our tax code so that it works for all Americans. It is time to rewrite the rules of our economy so that small businesses and average American families have a chance as well, not just the wealthy and the well-connected. We need to eliminate this loophole to make sure that those in the top are paying their fair share so that we can invest in an economy that lifts the incomes of families struggling to get ahead. The nonpartisan Joint Tax Committee, or Committee on Taxation, estimated that our legislation would raise over $15 billion in revenue over the next 10 years. That is $15 billion that we could invest. We could invest in working Americans and small businesses, which will lead to greater economic growth and raise the income and living standards of the middle class and working families. So, our Congress has a choice. We can reward the wealthy with tax preferences, or we can work together to repeal the carried interest loophole and use the revenue to invest in an economy that works for everyone and not just the wealthy few. For me, that choice is clear. And now I'd like to turn the microphone over to my colleague, my partner in this effort, Congressman Sandy Levin.
Well, thank you, Tammy. I try to be respectful to senators and say senator, but we know each other.
Sandy.
Anyway, I got into the habit of calling one senator by his first name. There's my brother. Look, I just want to say a few words. I want to put this in perspective. I was thinking of this as I walked over. This has been kind of a tough battle. I came into it when I had dinner with my late wife and a classmate of mine from law school who was a tax lawyer. I'm supposed to know quite a bit about tax issues, but I have to confess, this was many years ago, I had never heard the term carried interest. Never. he told me how in his practice of law he had been involved with it, and it was legal, but he increasingly thought it was indefensible. So then, eventually, I filed a bill. I had the staff look hard into the issue, and they educated me. So we introduced a bill, and there was some support. Eventually, that bill carried in the House twice, but there was much resistance. And there wasn't, if I might say so, much knowledge within the media. But then it caught on. And it caught on for three reasons. Some of it was the effort of yourself and others within the Congress. That was point one. We really worked hard at it. Point two was the business community began to get involved. And some of you, very successful, began to describe why you felt in terms of this country's economic development that carried interest was not necessary, but indeed was counterproductive. That was the second reason. And the third reason was that there was an increasing understanding in this country about income inequality. So now those three factors have combined, and so now you're having more and more people speaking out, including some people within the Republican Party. Not enough. They're going to, I think this week, but probably not, put out their plan, their tax plan. My guess is carried interest won't be in it. So I just want to say this. We've grabbed a hold of an issue that so illustrates what tax reform should be all about, and a vivid example of unfairness. So we give examples, and I like to think of the salesperson. And sometimes I go in and I ask how much of your income depends on what you sell. And the answer sometimes is very striking. And the second vivid example in terms of sweat equity are people, service personnel in restaurants. The minimum wage is inexcusable. So people who serve us, they depend on who comes in and what the generosity is. And if nobody comes in, if it's a bad day, it's a bad day for them. And yet, people who are investing other people's money, not their own, get a very sizable cut in addition to their 2% or more that was guaranteed, right? So I just want to throw this challenge out to all of us here. Name me anything that is more unfair. Oh, there are some things as bad or maybe worse. But name me anyone. Tell me how this is fair. Let me put it that way. Just tell me how this is fair. It isn't. And so I now want to turn over to Morris Pearl. I guess Morris is next, who will talk about this. And I just, as you come forth, and then others will, just on behalf of Tammy, Senator Baldwin, and myself, salute you for all of your efforts. We have a number of uphill battles in this institution, to put it mildly. On 4 hours sleep, I can say there are uphill battles. This is one that is going to happen. And it's going to happen in part because you and those of you who did well have come forth and said, we can testify personally why there needs to be the change. So I want to thank, on behalf of Tammy and myself, all of you who are here out of the business world for stepping up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Baldwin and Congressman Levin. It's today, today more than ever, I'm just so proud of our representatives over on the other side of the Capitol building here, doing what they're doing and continuing to carry the fight for all of our Americans. But there are a few Americans who are using their vast wealth to gain more political power, and then using their political power to project and enrich their wealth even more. Far too many of our elected representatives represent the wealthy and the powerful in preference to all of the rest of us. The American people need a litmus test to know who is on the people's side and who is on the side of the Wall Street oligarchs. And that litmus test is the inaction on the part of our leaders of our Congress to close the carried interest loophole. That's been debated for, frankly, as long as I can remember. I'm not quite as old as Congressman Levin, but as long as I can remember. And the American Investment Council, now run by Ken Mellman, the former RNC chair, and Mike Summers, the former chief of staff to John Boehner, sent a long letter making their case last year. They point out this would be a change to a long-standing practice. They're right about that. It'd be a change that is long overdue. The Patriotic Millionaires are actually in favor of people becoming rich, very rich. We think that if David Rubenstein can become a billionaire by managing his clients' investments really well, more power to him. He can't, however, decide to spend 0.25% of his income on fixing the Washington Monument and then say, oh, I'm a patriotic philanthropist. I shouldn't have to pay taxes at the same rate as the people who actually did the work repairing the monument. We think earning millions of dollars by working hard and getting carried interest is great, but they should pay income taxes like all the rest of the hardworking Americans. We're reaching out to every senator and every member of the House of Representatives. By the end of this summer, after we've had time to contact every one of them, we'll issue a report, and we'll detail the positions of each and every one of them, each and every member of the House and the Senate on closing the loophole, and we will publicize the report widely. That's what we do. It's critical that when Americans go to the polls in November, they know where their elected officials stand and who's on whose side. We'll be happy to debate the merits. If any member can speak in favor of this loophole, we'll be glad to have that discussion. But we've not found that member yet. The only actual argument for keeping this loophole is that America has capitulated to favoritism, capitulated to the idea that America was meant to be two nations, one for the rich and one for everyone else. I've not given up in living in one nation, indivisible, shining for all of its people. Thank you. I now introduce my colleague, Art, from Utah. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Art Lipson. I live in Utah. I am a patriotic millionaire. I'm here to speak about the inequity in the carried interest rule. My profession is that I'm a investment manager, a Wall Street investment manager, actually a hedge fund manager. And every year I benefit from the fact that I pay a lower tax rate on my earned income than other people do. In fact, I get to sit in an air-conditioned office while I pay this lower tax rate, while other people are out in the sun. And today, if you're in Phoenix, it's 120. So I clearly have a better deal. America is a country where we espouse fairness and equality. And it's a long-standing principle that we all pay our taxes, and based on our income, we should all be paying the same tax rate. I see no justification in the fact that I'm paying a lower tax rate than other people. Patriotic Millionaires of Utah have visited Senator Orrin Hatch's office, where we asked Senator Hatch to meet with us then, and again to meet with us on this trip here to Washington today. And he's refused to respond. We'd like to know why he doesn't introduce legislation to remove this and to reduce the deficit. He campaigns constantly on the fact that the country has a large deficit, and this would be a very equitable way of closing it. It's hedge fund managers, some of them tend to have enormous incomes. I'm not in that bracket, but it's an interesting fact that the 50 wealthiest hedge fund managers in America last year earned $500 million a year on average. That's a Bloomberg survey that they did, $500 million a year. And somehow, despite earning this enormous amount of income, they resent paying the same tax rate as people who earn $50,000 a year. Wouldn't it be fair for them to step up and pay the same tax rate as other people? So I hope Senator Hatch is listening. I hope he brings this matter up in the Senate Rules Committee, and we would be happy to discuss it. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Hi, I'm Mary Loophole. I wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts about what Hillary Clinton said yesterday in her speech about how if Congress didn't act on this issue, she thinks the administration should act on this issue by itself. Do you agree with that?
So I will first of all tell you I did not get a chance to hear her speech yesterday as we were engaged on the. I went over to cheer them on, but I'm sure Congressman Levin was otherwise occupied also. Certainly, I'd like to see Congress act, and I certainly appreciate political leaders, especially Secretary Clinton, speaking out in favor of closing this loophole. But ultimately, we have to start by closing the carried interest loophole and move on to the entire tax code and recognize the ways in which it has been rigged to favor the most powerful, the wealthiest, and bring fairness to that tax code. And so I want to see Congress lead on this. Sandy?
Just briefly, Senator Clinton favors closing this loophole. I just want to emphasize, we're not sure how much money it would bring in. There's substantial evidence that the $15 billion figure is too low. Some believe it's much too low. But the key point is, it is the epitome of unfairness. When you really think about that, investing other people's money and saying that you need to have a much lower tax rate because you're taking a chance. People of all walks of life take chances. And so why should the wealthiest get a much lower tax rate when they're already getting a substantial cut and it isn't their money? Anything else?
It's not only Secretary Clinton, but Donald Trump, Senator Sanders, President Obama, and Jeb Bush all support closing this loophole. So how can we explain to the American people the inaction of Congress?
I think it's special interest who've spent money on political contributions, quite frankly, in my opinion, corrupting our public officials through these contributions where they're reluctant to act.
This is a great week to ask a question like that when clearly not only our political leaders in different parties, but also the American public is strongly behind something and you don't see action from Congress. Obviously, we're dealing with that on a number of issues this week. And the bottom line is the people's voice needs to be heard.
Yeah, maybe we'll end with that. It's the people's voice. What's happening here is a further effort to outreach to the public. And without mixing issues too much, we spent a lot of time yesterday on an issue which will be decided really if the public intervenes. And the same is true, and I'm confident, because if we go to the public, and you need to help us, and spell this out, my guess is that the overwhelming number of people would say, overwhelming, that carried interest is a loophole that needs to go. And so keep working, because it's going, and will be gone. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.